Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I know you use this video to fall asleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what city are you watching? I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, let's dive in. Marcus Hartwell had always prided himself on his methodical approach to journalism. Facts, sources, verification, these were his tools against a world increasingly comfortable with half-truths and speculation. So, when the GPS signal died somewhere along the winding mountain road, and the snow began falling with the sort of vindictive persistence that suggested nature had personal grievances, he didn't panic. He simply pulled his rental car to the side of what he hoped was still a road and consulted the paper map he'd purchased as a backup. The assignment was straightforward enough: investigate reports of a miracle healing at a remote mountain retreat, debunk the obvious fraud, and file a 2,000-word piece for the magazine by Thursday. Marcus had built a career on such debunking. Faith healers, psychics, ghost hunters, all of them eventually revealed to be either delusional or criminal. This would be no different. Except now he was lost in what appeared to be the beginning of a blizzard, with his phone showing no signal and the temperature gauge on his dashboard creeping steadily downward. The map, rendered nearly useless by the dim interior light and his own growing anxiety, suggested he was somewhere in the Cascade Range, perhaps 20 miles from the nearest town. The retreat he'd been seeking, if it existed at all, could be anywhere among these peaks. Marcus squinted through the windshield at the wall of white that had replaced the world. The headlights illuminated perhaps 10 feet of swirling snow before being swallowed by darkness. He'd covered enough mountain rescue stories to know the statistics. People died in conditions like this, sometimes within sight of safety. He was considering his options: attempt to continue driving blindly or wait in the car and hope the storm passed, when a shape materialized in the headlight beam. At first, he thought it might be a tree or boulder, but as he leaned forward, wiping condensation from the windshield, he could make out the angular lines of human construction. A cabin. Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. Even if it was abandoned, it would provide shelter until the storm passed. He grabbed his laptop bag, pulled on his heavy coat, and stepped into the howling wind. The cold hit him like a physical blow, snow stinging his face and immediately finding every gap in his clothing. He stumbled forward, using the headlight beam as a guide, until his hands found the rough wood of the cabin's wall. Following it around, he discovered a front door. Old-fashioned, heavy wood with iron hardware that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. Marcus knocked first, a habit of courtesy despite the circumstances. When no answer came, he tried the handle and was surprised to find it unlocked. The door swung open with barely a creak, revealing warmth and golden light that seemed impossibly welcoming after the storm's fury. He stepped inside quickly, pushing the door closed against the wind, and found himself in what appeared to be the main room of a well-appointed log cabin. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on knotty pine walls adorned with landscape paintings and rustic decor. The air smelled of wood smoke and something else, something that made his stomach suddenly aware of its emptiness. Food, recently cooked food. Marcus called out a greeting as he shook snow from his coat, but his voice seemed to be absorbed by the heavy wooden beams and thick rugs. The cabin felt occupied, not just lived in, but actively inhabited at this very moment. Yet he could see into the kitchen area from where he stood, and it appeared empty. "Hello?" He tried again, louder this time. "I'm sorry to intrude. My car broke down in the storm." Silence, except for the fire's crackling and the storm's muffled roar outside. As his eyes adjusted to the warm light, Marcus noticed details that made his journalist's instincts prickle with curiosity and unease. The fire was not just burning, it was recently tended, with fresh logs arranged precisely for optimal heat. The paintings on the walls, which had seemed like standard cabin decor from the doorway, revealed themselves on closer inspection to be original works and disturbing ones. They depicted mountain landscapes, but there was something wrong with the perspectives, as if the artist had been looking at familiar scenes from impossible angles. And then there was the dining table. It dominated the center of the room, a massive piece of dark wood that could easily seat 8 people. But it was set for 4. 4-place settings with matching china, crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded with hotel precision. The silverware gleamed in the firelight, and steam rose from the serving dishes arranged in the center. Steam from food that was clearly impossibly warm. Marcus approached the table slowly, his reporter's mind cataloging details even as a deeper part of his brain began sending urgent warnings. The serving dishes contained what appeared to be a complete meal. Roast beef sliced and arranged on a platter, mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting in a small crater at the center, green beans that still had their bright color, dinner rolls that looked as if they'd just come from the oven. He reached out tentatively and held his hand over the nearest dish. Heat rose from it in visible waves. The food wasn't just warm, it was hot, as if it had been placed on the table moments before his arrival. "Hello," Marcus called out more urgently now, moving toward what appeared to be a hallway leading to other rooms. "Is someone here? I can explain." But the hallway stretched into darkness, and something about that darkness made him reluctant to explore further without invitation. Instead, he returned to the main room, trying to make sense of the situation. The logical explanations were simple enough. The cabin's owners had stepped out briefly, perhaps to gather more firewood or check on something outside. They would return shortly, and he could explain his situation and hopefully wait out the storm in their guest room or on their couch. People in remote areas were generally understanding about weather emergencies. But if they had just stepped out, why was the door unlocked? And why leave such an elaborate meal unattended? Marcus had grown up in a small town, and he knew that even the most trusting people didn't leave their homes wide open with dinner on the table. He pulled out his phone, more from habit than hope, and confirmed what he expected. No signal. The device showed 11:47 p.m., which seemed wrong. He'd left the hotel that morning around 10 a.m., and while he'd made several stops and taken some wrong turns, it shouldn't be nearly midnight. But then again, winter days in the mountains were short, and the storm had made everything disorienting. Marcus set his laptop bag down near the fireplace and returned to examine the table more closely. The place settings were identical, each with a dinner plate, salad plate, soup bowl, and multiple utensils arranged in perfect formal order. The crystal glasses were filled with water, no ice, and the cloth napkins were folded in an elaborate pattern he'd seen only in high-end restaurants. It was the sort of table setting that required planning and effort, the kind that might be prepared for a special occasion or important guests. Not the sort of thing one left unattended, especially not with the food still steaming hot. Marcus walked around the table, noting that each place setting appeared to be waiting for a specific person. Not just because of the formal arrangement, but because of small personal touches. A pair of reading glasses beside one plate, a small notebook and pen beside another, a pill bottle, prescription, though he couldn't read the label from this distance, beside the third. The fourth place setting, the one nearest to where he stood, had nothing personal beside it. It was perfect, pristine, waiting. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows, reminding Marcus of the storm raging outside. He moved to look out, but the glass reflected only the warm interior, turning the windows into dark mirrors. In them, he could see the dining table behind him, the place settings, the steaming food, and his own figure looking somehow smaller and more isolated than he felt. And, for just a moment, in the reflection, he could have sworn he saw other figures seated at the table. Marcus spun around, heart hammering, but the dining room was empty except for himself. The chairs were pushed neatly under the table, unoccupied. The food continued to steam. Marcus told himself it had been a trick of the light, a combination of stress, exhaustion, and the dancing shadows cast by the fire. He was a rational man, a skeptic by profession. He didn't see things that weren't there, but the feeling of being watched had settled over him like a cold blanket, and he found himself moving restlessly around the cabin's main room, examining everything more closely. The built-in bookshelves contained an eclectic mix: classic literature, modern fiction, several volumes on local history, and a surprising number of journals and memoirs. Many of the books showed signs of frequent reading, with bookmarks and margin notes. One book lay open on a side table, a leather-bound journal with handwritten entries. Marcus hesitated only briefly before reading the exposed page. December 15th. The new family arrived today. 3 of them, plus they're expecting a 4th for dinner. I've prepared the usual meal. They seem nice enough, though they ask odd questions about the area. The father keeps asking about time, about how long things take here. I told him time moves differently in the mountains, especially in winter. He didn't seem satisfied with that answer. The mother is quiet, keeps looking at the windows as if she's expecting something. The daughter, she can't be more than 16, keeps staring at the 4th place setting. When I asked about their guest, they said he would be arriving soon, that he was already on his way. I wonder if they know. The entry was dated from the current year, but the ink looked faded and the paper had the yellow tinge of age. Marcus flipped to other pages, but they were blank, not just unwritten, but blank in the way that suggested they had never been written on at all. He was about to examine more of the books when he heard a sound from the kitchen area, a soft scraping, like a chair being pulled across a floor. "Hello?" Marcus called out, relief mixing with apprehension in his voice. Finally, the explanation for everything: the cabin's owner returning from wherever they'd gone. "I'm sorry for intruding. I got caught in the storm and—" But when he rounded the corner into the kitchen, it was empty. The scraping sound had stopped and nothing appeared disturbed. The kitchen was clean and organized, with dishes drying in a rack beside the sink and a few cooking utensils still showing signs of recent use. On the counter sat a note, written in the same handwriting as the journal. "Welcome. Please make yourself comfortable. Dinner's ready when you are. The others will be along shortly." The paper looked fresh, as if it had just been written, but when Marcus touched it, it felt old and brittle. He was beginning to understand that whatever was happening in this cabin operated according to rules he didn't comprehend. The rational part of his mind continued to offer explanations: eccentric owners, elaborate pranks, some kind of themed bed and breakfast experience he wasn't aware he'd stumbled into. But the primitive part of his brain, the part that had kept his ancestors alive through countless dangers, was screaming warnings. The storm outside seemed to have intensified. When Marcus tried the front door, he found that while it opened, the world beyond was a wall of white so complete that he couldn't see more than a few inches. The wind was strong enough to make standing in the doorway difficult, and the cold was brutal. Even if he could locate his car, attempting to drive in these conditions would be suicide. He was trapped here, at least until morning. Marcus returned to the main room and stood before the fireplace, trying to think through his options. The cabin was warm and well stocked. If he could just weather the night, morning would bring clearer skies and the ability to get help. He could sleep on the couch, leave everything as he found it, and explain the situation to the owners when they returned. But as he stood there, he became aware of a sound that made his skin crawl. The soft clink of silverware against china, coming from the dining area behind him. Marcus turned slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. The 4-place settings were no longer empty. 3 of the chairs now had occupants, though he had to blink several times before he could convince himself of what he was seeing. The figures were translucent, like images projected through fog, but they were definitely there. A middle-aged man in an old-fashioned suit, a woman in a dress that might have been fashionable decades ago, and a teenager, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, wearing clothes that seemed to shift between modern and vintage with each flicker of the firelight. They were eating dinner, cutting their food with precise movements, occasionally lifting their water glasses to lips he could barely see. None of them looked at him, but he had the distinct impression they were aware of his presence. The 4th chair, the one with the pristine place setting and no personal items, remained empty. Marcus stood frozen, watching this impossible scene. He wanted to speak, to run, to do something other than stand there like a statue, but his body seemed to have forgotten how to respond to his commands. The figures at the table continued their silent meal, and gradually Marcus became aware that they were waiting. The empty chair was directly in his line of sight, and as he watched, steam began to rise from the plate and bowl at that setting. Fresh heat, as if an invisible server had just placed a hot meal in front of the absent diner. Waiting for him, the realization hit Marcus with the force of physical blow. The 4th place setting had been prepared for him, not for some expected guest of the cabin's owners, not for a family member running late to dinner. For him, specifically, the lost traveler who would inevitably find his way to this door when the storm trapped him on the mountain road. But that was impossible. No one had known he was coming to this area. His assignment had been last minute, and he'd told no one about his specific travel plans. Even if someone had wanted to prepare for his arrival, they couldn't have known when or where he'd be forced to seek shelter. Unless they hadn't been preparing for Marcus Hartwell, journalist. Unless they had simply been preparing for whoever would arrive. The 4th person, the one who would complete the dinner party. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" The 3 figures at the table didn't look up, but their movements became more pronounced, more deliberately visible. The man cut his meat with slow precision. The woman delicately spooned mashed potatoes. The girl lifted her water glass to her lips and drank with careful, measured sips. "What do you want?" Marcus tried again, louder this time. Still no response, but now the girl, still without looking at him, raised her free hand and pointed at the empty chair. The message was clear. Sit down. Join us. Complete the dinner party. Every instinct Marcus possessed told him not to approach that table. Whatever these figures were, hallucinations brought on by stress and exhaustion, or something else entirely. Engaging with them felt dangerous in a way he couldn't articulate. But the alternative was to spend the night in the same room with them, watching their silent meal, knowing they were waiting for him to fulfill some purpose he didn't understand. And he realized with growing dismay, hungry. The smell of the food had been affecting him since he'd arrived, and now, watching the three figures eat, his stomach clenched with genuine need. When had he last eaten? The timeline of his day had become confused, but it might have been 10 hours or more. Marcus took a step toward the table. The moment he moved, the atmosphere in the room changed. The fire burned brighter, casting clearer light on the three diners. Their forms became more solid, more present, though still translucent enough that he could see the wall behind them through their bodies. They were no longer ignoring him. He could feel their attention like weight, even though they still didn't turn their heads in his direction. Another step, and he could see their faces more clearly. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The woman was perhaps a decade younger, with dark hair pulled back in an elegant style. The girl bore a strong resemblance to both adults, their daughter, almost certainly, a family dressed for dinner, eating together, including him in their evening meal. Under other circumstances, it might have been a pleasant domestic scene, but these were not other circumstances, and Marcus could see now that while the family appeared to be eating, their food never diminished. The man's roast beef remained the same size despite his steady cutting and chewing. The woman's mashed potatoes showed no signs of being consumed, though she continued to lift spoonfuls to her mouth. The girl's green beans remained unchanged on her plate. They weren't eating. They were performing the act of eating, endlessly repeating the motions while waiting for him to join them. Marcus reached the table and stood behind the empty chair. The place setting was even more elaborate up close. The china was clearly expensive, possibly antique, with a delicate floral pattern. The crystal glasses caught and refracted the firelight into tiny rainbows. The silverware was heavy, real silver rather than plate, with an ornate pattern he didn't recognize. The food at his setting was identical to theirs. Thin slices of perfectly cooked roast beef, creamy mashed potatoes with a pool of melted butter, bright green beans, and a dinner roll that looked impossibly fresh. Steam rose from every dish, and the smell was overwhelming. Rich, savory, exactly what his body craved after the stress and cold of the storm. Marcus pulled out the chair and sat down. The moment he did, the three figures looked up at him with warm, welcoming smiles. The man raised his water glass in a toast. The woman nodded approvingly. The girl giggled, a sound like silver bells that seemed to come from very far away. "Welcome," the man said, his voice carrying the same distant quality as the girl's laughter. "We've been waiting for you." "How long?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure why that was the first question that came to mind. The woman tilted her head thoughtfully. "Time moves differently here, especially in winter. It's hard to say. But we're very glad you found us," the girl added. "It's been so long since we had a proper dinner party." Marcus looked down at his place setting. The food looked delicious, and his hunger was becoming painful. But something about this situation felt like a trap, though he couldn't identify exactly what kind. "Where are the cabin's owners?" he asked. "I mean, this is your cabin, right?" The three figures exchanged glances and their smiles became sad. "This has been our home for quite some time," the man said carefully. "Though we haven't had many visitors lately. People don't travel these roads much anymore, especially not in winter." "Eat," the woman urged gently. "The food is getting cold." But it wasn't getting cold. Steam continued to rise from every dish, and when Marcus held his hand over his plate, he could feel the heat. The food would remain at perfect temperature for as long as necessary. Marcus picked up his fork. The first bite was revelation. The roast beef was perfectly seasoned, tender enough to cut with a fork, with a richness that spoke of high-quality meat prepared by someone who understood cooking as an art. The mashed potatoes were creamy and smooth, with real butter and just a hint of garlic. The green beans had been cooked exactly right, tender but still with a slight crispness, seasoned with what tasted like almonds and herbs. It was, without question, the best meal Marcus had eaten in years. "This is incredible," he said, and he meant it. "Did you cook this?" The woman beamed with pleasure. "Cooking has always been one of my passions. I'm so glad you're enjoying it." "What brings you to our mountain?" the man asked, cutting another piece of his own eternally replenishing beef. "It's been some time since we've had a traveler." Marcus found himself relaxing despite his earlier apprehensions. The three figures, family, he was now certain, were warm and welcoming. Their translucent appearance had become less noticeable as the meal progressed, and he was starting to think his earlier fears had been products of stress and an overactive imagination. "I'm a journalist," he explained between bites. "I was heading to some kind of retreat up here, investigating reports of miraculous healings, but I got lost in the storm." The girl laughed. "Oh, you mean the Whitmore place? That's about 15 miles further up the mountain, though I don't think they're doing healings anymore." "No," her father agreed. "That ended some time ago. Bad business, that." "What happened?" Marcus asked, his professional instincts engaging. The family exchanged glances again, and their expressions grew somber. "Some things are better left alone," the woman said quietly. "People seeking miracles. Sometimes they find more than they bargained for." Marcus wanted to pursue the subject, but something about their demeanor warned him away from pressing too hard. Instead, he focused on the meal, which continued to be extraordinary. The dinner roll was warm and buttery, with a crust that crackled between his teeth. Even the water in his crystal glass tasted pure and cold, like mountain snow. As he ate, the family told him about the area, local history, hiking trails, the best times of year to visit. Their knowledge was encyclopedic, and they spoke about places and events with the kind of intimate detail that came from decades of residence. The girl particularly enjoyed describing the wildflower meadows that appeared in spring, painting verbal pictures so vivid that Marcus could almost see the bright blooms against the snow-covered landscape outside. "How long have you lived here?" Marcus asked during a pause in the conversation. The three figures grew quiet, and for a moment the only sound was the crackling of the fire. "A long time," the man finally said. "Longer than we expected when we first arrived." "We came here for a vacation," the woman added, "a family retreat. We thought we'd stay a week or two, then return to the city. But the mountains have a way of keeping you," the girl said softly, "especially in winter. Sometimes you can't leave even when you want to." There was something in their tone that made Marcus uneasy, but the food was so good and the warmth of the cabin so comforting after the storm that he didn't want to examine the feeling too closely. He was safe, well-fed, and in pleasant company. Whatever strangeness he had perceived earlier could wait until morning to be investigated. "This meal," Marcus said, gesturing at his plate, "it's like something from a 5-star restaurant. You could make a fortune with cooking like this." The woman's smile was wistful. I did cook professionally once upon a time, a small restaurant in Seattle, but that was before. Before what? Before we came to the mountains, she said simply. Marcus noticed that despite continuing to eat throughout the conversation, his own food remained unchanged. His plate still held the same amount of roast beef, the same mound of mashed potatoes, the same serving of green beans. It was as if the food replaced itself as he consumed it, maintaining perfect portions and temperature. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside began to creep up his spine. "I should probably check on my car," he said, starting to rise from his chair. "Make sure the battery doesn't die overnight." "Oh, don't worry about that," the man said quickly. "Cars run fine up here, even in the cold. Besides, the storm is much too dangerous right now." Marcus glanced toward the windows, but they still reflected only the interior of the cabin. The storm could have ended hours ago, and he would have no way of knowing. "I should at least," he began. "Please," the girl interrupted, and there was something desperate in her translucent eyes. "Don't go yet. We so rarely have company, and the meal isn't finished." Marcus looked down at his plate. She was right. Despite eating steadily for what felt like at least an hour, the food remained untouched. The meal would never be finished because it couldn't be finished. The realization brought with it a flood of other understanding. The family's old-fashioned clothing, their encyclopedic but dated knowledge of the area. The way they spoke about events as if they had happened long ago, but with the freshness of recent memory. The translucent appearance he'd initially attributed to his own stressed perception. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked quietly. The three figures looked at him with expressions of infinite sadness. "We came for Christmas," the man said. "Our daughter's winter break from school. It was supposed to be a special family time, just the three of us." "What year?" Marcus whispered. 1987, the woman replied. "December 1987. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. 38 years. They had been here for 38 years, waiting for travelers who might complete their dinner party, sharing their eternal meal with the lost and the stranded. "What happened to you?" "The same storm that brought you," the girl said, "or one just like it. We were driving back to Seattle after our vacation when the blizzard hit. Dad pulled over to wait it out, but the car got buried in snow. We made it to this cabin just like you did. The door was unlocked," the man continued. "There was a fire burning and dinner was set for 4. We thought someone would come back, that we could explain and ask for help. But no one came," the woman finished. "At least, not until the next family arrived. A couple with their teenage son, lost in another storm. They joined us for dinner. And then another family after that, and another. Always 3 people, always needing a 4th to complete the table." Marcus understood now. The cabin was a trap, not malicious but inexorable. It provided shelter for the lost and stranded, but the price of that shelter was participation in an endless dinner party, a warm and welcoming gathering that could never truly end. "How many?" he asked. "Families. Dozens over the years. They stay for dinner, sometimes for days, and then they continue on their way when the storms clear. But we remain. Why?" The 3 figures looked at each other with expressions of love and infinite sorrow. "Because someone has to set the table," the girl said simply. "Someone has to cook the meal. Someone has to welcome the travelers and make sure they're fed and warm and safe. We're the hosts now," her father explained. "This is our duty, our purpose. We make sure no one dies alone in the storm." Marcus thought about the journal entry he'd read, about the writer preparing for the new family and their expected fourth guest. Someone else had been the host once, someone who had prepared meal after meal for countless travelers before passing the responsibility to this family from 1987. "What happens if I leave?" he asked. "You can't," the woman said gently. "Not until the storm ends, and the storm's here. They last as long as they need to." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with the same sound he'd heard from the kitchen earlier. He moved to the front door and yanked it open, letting in a blast of frigid air and swirling snow. The world beyond was still the same white wall of nothingness he'd encountered before, but now he understood that the storm wasn't weather. It was the cabin's method of ensuring its guests remained until their role in the eternal dinner party was complete. He closed the door and turned back to face the family. They watched him with patient, understanding eyes. "How long will this last?" Marcus asked. "Until you're ready to accept your place," the man replied. "Some people need only one night. Others require more time to understand. And if I never accept it?" "Everyone accepts it eventually," the girl said sadly. "The alternative is to spend eternity hungry and alone." Marcus returned to the table and sat down heavily. The food was still warm, still perfect, still inexhaustible. His laptop bag sat by the fireplace, containing his notes and files about the healing retreat he'd never reach, the story he'd never write. "What about my life?" he asked. "My job, my apartment, people who will wonder where I am." "They'll assume you died in the storm," the woman said with compassionate honesty. "It happens often enough in these mountains. Eventually, they'll stop looking." Marcus picked up his fork and took another bite of the perfect roast beef. It tasted like despair, seasoned with the bitter herbs of understanding. The meal continued in silence for a long time after that. Marcus ate mechanically, his mind racing through everything he'd learned and trying to find some alternative to the fate the family had described. He was a journalist, trained to find solutions and escape routes. There had to be something he was missing, some way to leave this place without condemning himself to their eternal existence. But as the hours passed, and he became increasingly uncertain whether they were actually hours or simply the cabin's version of time, no solutions presented themselves. The storm outside remained constant, the food on his plate remained unchanged, and the three translucent figures continued their own endless meal with the patience of people who had been practicing for decades. "Is it painful?" Marcus finally asked. "Being what you are now?" The family considered the question carefully. "Not painful, exactly," the father said, "but there's a sadness to it. We remember being alive, remember plans we made and places we wanted to see. Those memories become more distant over time, but they never fully disappear. The hardest part is watching people we've grown to care about leave," the mother added. "We form connections with the travelers we host, share stories and laughter, and then they move on to wherever they're going next. We remain behind, waiting for the next storm, the next lost souls who need shelter." "But there are compensations," the girl said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been contentment. "We're together. We're helping people. And every guest teaches us something new about the world beyond these mountains." Marcus thought about his life in the city, his apartment that he barely saw between assignments, his relationships that had gradually faded as his work consumed more of his attention, his growing cynicism about human nature as he exposed fraud after fraud. It hadn't been a particularly fulfilling existence, though it had been undeniably alive. "The people who leave," he said, "where do they go?" "Back to their lives," the father replied. "Back to the world. They remember their time here as a pleasant interlude, a kindness from strangers during a difficult journey. Most of them think of us as simply a nice family who shared their dinner. They don't remember you as this. The living see what they can accept seeing," the mother explained. "If understanding the truth would damage their minds or hearts, they remember us as ordinary people. Only those who are ready to join us see us as we truly are." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "And I see you as you truly are." "Yes," the girl said softly. "You've been ready from the moment you walked through that door." Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that he wasn't ready for anything except returning to his normal life. But deep in his heart, he knew she was right. The ease with which he'd accepted the impossible situation, his lack of genuine panic or attempts to escape, the way the perfect meal had drawn him to the table, all of it suggested that some part of him had been prepared for this transformation, maybe even seeking it. He thought about the story that had brought him to the mountains, the reports of miraculous healings at the Whitmore retreat. People desperate for something beyond their ordinary existence, willing to believe in possibilities that logic rejected. He'd come here to debunk their hopes, but perhaps he'd been searching for the same impossible thing they were. "What if I choose not to join you?" Marcus asked. "What if I just refuse to participate?" The family's expressions grew sad. "Then you'll remain here anyway," the father said. "But you'll be alone with your hunger and your anger until you change your mind. It's not a punishment. We would never force anyone, but the cabin won't release you until you find peace with your situation." "How long does that usually take?" "For some, minutes. For others, years. One man spent 3 decades sitting in that chair by the fireplace, refusing to eat or speak. Eventually, though, he joined us at the table. Everyone does in the end." Marcus looked around the warm, comfortable cabin. The fire continued to burn without anyone tending it. The food remained perfect and plentiful. Outside, the storm raged with supernatural persistence. He could spend eternity here in comfort, or eternity here in misery. But either way, it would be eternity, unless he was willing to embrace his new role as host. Would I still be me?" he asked. "More yourself than you've been in years," the mother said with gentle certainty. "All the petty worries, the career anxieties, the loneliness, those fall away. What remains is the best of who you are, your curiosity, your desire to help others, your capacity for connection." Marcus thought about the last time he'd felt truly happy, truly connected to other people. It had been years, possibly decades. His work had made him suspicious of everyone's motives, his success had isolated him from genuine relationships, and his comfortable lifestyle had become a prison of routine and cynicism. Here, at this impossible table with this impossible family, he felt more at peace than he had in memory. "If I agree," he said slowly, "what happens to you? Do you get to move on?" The 3 figures brightened visibly. "We don't know for certain," the father admitted, "but we believe so. Each family that has served as hosts eventually passes the responsibility to newcomers. They fade from the cabin peacefully, and we've always assumed they find their way to whatever comes next." Would you want that?" Marcus asked. "We've been ready for a long time," the mother said. "We love this place and the work we do here, but we've been away from life for nearly 40 years. We're prepared to discover what lies beyond." The girl leaned forward, her translucent form becoming more solid with emotion. We've watched so many people find their way back to life after staying with us. Families reunited, individuals discovering new purpose, travelers who arrived broken and left whole. We've helped them, and in doing so, we've found meaning in our existence here. But we're ready for our own journey to continue. Marcus felt the weight of their hope, their trust in him to carry forward something precious. They weren't asking him to sacrifice himself. They were offering him the chance to transform his isolation into connection, his cynicism into compassion. "What would I need to do?" he asked. "Simply accept your role," the father explained. "Welcome the travelers who come, share meals with them, help them find what they need to continue their journeys. The cabin will provide everything necessary: food, warmth, shelter. You'll become part of something larger than yourself." "And I wouldn't be alone?" "Never alone," the mother assured him. "The mountains are full of lost souls. There will always be someone who needs what we offer here." Marcus looked down at his hands, solid and warm around his silverware. Then he looked at the three figures who had become more real to him than most of the living people in his life. They had spent 4 decades providing comfort to strangers, asking nothing in return except the opportunity to serve their purpose. It wasn't the life he'd planned. But then again, the life he'd planned hadn't been working very well. "If I do this," he said, "will I remember who I was? Will I remember my life before?" "For a while," the girl said, "those memories will fade gradually, like dreams upon waking. What remains will be the essence of who you are, freed from all the things that made you unhappy." Marcus thought about his editor, who would eventually stop calling when stories went unfiled. His landlord, who would clear out his apartment when the rent went unpaid. The few friends he had, who would wonder briefly what had happened to him before moving on with their own lives. His disappearance would create ripples, but small ones that would quickly smooth over. But here, in this place, he could matter. He could be part of something that provided real help to people in genuine need. "I accept," Marcus said quietly. The moment the words left his mouth, the world around him shifted. The cabin became more vivid, more real, as if he'd been viewing it through dirty glass that had suddenly been cleaned. The warmth penetrated deeper into his bones. The smell of the food became richer, more complex. The fire's light grew brighter and more welcoming, and the three figures across from him began to change. Their translucent forms became more solid, more present, but also somehow lighter. The sadness that had underlaid all their expressions lifted, replaced by joy and relief and something that might have been anticipation. "Thank you," the mother whispered, and her voice carried new resonance. "Thank you for allowing us to continue our journey. Take care of this place," the father said, standing from his chair. "Take care of the people who find their way here. They need what you can give them." The girl came around the table and hugged Marcus, her arms now solid and warm. "You're going to be wonderful at this," she said. "I can see it in you, the kindness that's been hidden under all that skepticism." As Marcus watched, the three figures began to fade, not disappearing, but transforming. They became points of light that drifted upward through the cabin ceiling, rising like sparks from the fire. Their forms dissolved, but their presence lingered for a moment longer, a sense of gratitude and peace that filled the entire room. Then they were gone, leaving Marcus alone at the table set for 4. Marcus sat in the silence for a long time, absorbing the magnitude of what had just occurred. He was no longer Marcus Hartwell, investigative journalist. He was something new, something that didn't yet have a name but felt more right than anything he'd been before. The cabin around him was his now, and he could sense its workings in ways he hadn't before. The fire would burn as long as needed. The food would remain perfect and abundant. The door would open only for those who truly needed shelter, and the storms would last precisely as long as necessary to complete whatever work needed to be done. He understood now that the cabin existed in a space between the ordinary world and something else. A way station for souls in transition, a place where the lost could find direction and the broken could find healing. He was its guardian now, its host, and the responsibility felt both weighty and natural. Marcus finished his meal. Really finished it this time, watching as the food diminished with each bite until only empty plates remained. When he was done, he cleared the table and washed the dishes, preparing for whatever came next. He didn't have to wait long. A knock came at the door just as he was putting away the last of the silverware. Marcus opened it to find a young woman standing in the storm, snow clinging to her dark hair and desperation in her eyes. "Please," she said, "I'm lost. My car broke down and I don't know where I am." Marcus stepped aside, welcoming her into the warmth. "Come in," he said. "You're safe now. I was just about to prepare dinner." As she entered, he noticed two more figures emerging from the storm behind her. An elderly man and a middle-aged woman, all of them looking exhausted and frightened by their ordeal. 3 travelers, a dinner party for 4. Marcus smiled and began setting the table. Years passed, though time had little meaning in the space the cabin occupied. Marcus welcomed countless travelers, sharing meals and stories, providing comfort to the lost and strength to the weary. Each group taught him something new about human resilience and the connections that bound people together. Some guests stayed only a single night before the storm cleared and they continued on their way. Others remained for days or weeks, working through whatever crisis had brought them to the mountains. A few, like Marcus himself, recognized that they had found something they'd been searching for without knowing it. Marcus never aged. His hunger was always satisfied by the perfect meals he prepared. His loneliness was constantly alleviated by the stream of people who needed his help. He had become exactly what the cabin required: a guardian who understood the value of sanctuary, a host who recognized that sometimes the most profound kindness was simply offering a warm meal to strangers. The outside world changed around him. Through his guests, he learned about technological advances, political upheavals, cultural shifts, but the fundamental human needs he served remained constant: shelter from the storm, food for the body, and connection with other souls. Marcus often wondered about the family who had preceded him. Had they found peace in whatever realm they'd moved to? He hoped so. He hoped that when his own time as host ended, as it eventually would, he would carry with him the satisfaction of work well done, service freely given, and love shared without reservation. Until then, he would maintain the cabin, prepare the meals, and set the table for 4. Because somewhere out in the storm, 3 more lost travelers were making their way toward his door, and they would need what only he could provide: a place at the table, a moment of warmth, and the understanding that no one had to face the darkness alone. The dinner was always ready, the door was always open, and Marcus was always waiting to welcome whoever the storm brought home.